Welcome to Herbal Explorations, a podcast hosted by Wilson Lau of New Herbs. Each week, we speak to leading experts about what's happening in the herbal industry.
Hi, I'm Suzanne Shelton, and today I'm having another one of my conversations with Wilson Lau, the president of New Herbs. New Herbs is the premier Chinese herb importer into the dietary supplements industry. Hi, Wilson.
Hi, Suzanne. How are you doing today?
Great. How are you?
Oh, I can't complain. It's a lovely day in California.
Excellent. It's raining in Chicago, but I'm in Chicago, so who can complain? So one of the things we wanted to talk about today was the resilience of the supply chain and how it used to be you were the only one who ever used the phrase supply chain, but now apparently it's the number one concern in the industry is resilient supply chain. So let's dive into this. And you're the guy who always sees way ahead. So let's talk about what companies need to be thinking about now. I mean, how are they maintaining their continuity, and what are they not thinking about that they should be?
I think, after COVID, a lot of us have in the industry and all industries have really looked at our supply chain and how to make sure there's continuity in it. So I think planning and projections is still, the basics are very important. However, because of our industry, botanicals, and it's these herbs grow, we really have to factor in weather and other events that are unpredictable. I think not only is the number of extreme weather events increasing, but also, other unpredictable events, whether it's human-made or natural.
Okay, that makes sense. Well, how can companies plan for that? I mean, what do you recommend people try to anticipate, or are there practices that maybe would save them from a variety of incidents or events?
Yeah, I think really looking at the items that you use and which ones are more susceptible to the impact of this variability, right? For example, you may not want to stock a lot of glass bottles, although they last forever if you're using them, because you might be able to get them pretty much easily. Although the last supply chain said that assumption is flawed because it was an issue, right? But, some of these things that may allow you to really store them and have a better shelf life. Let me give you an example of what I'm thinking of that we all use in the herbal industry, or a lot of us. Like, for example, if it's a root crop, something like echinacea root or something that I sell, ginseng root or astragalus root, you may want to start thinking about 2-year projections and working with your partner and your suppliers, how you can sort of build a buffer in that. Because, 2 or 3-year-old root keeps so well stored properly, the phytoactives haven't changed really at all, if anything, negligible change. Whereas something like an aromatic herb like mint, you probably don't want to do that because it does degrade quite quickly because you have those volatile oils. And we have talked about this. It's really like, although we all have this idea of perception of freshness, I think we should only worry about freshness where it matters, right? If it doesn't matter how fresh the herb is, besides you feel better about it, then that's one tool you can have in your quiver to sort of even out some of these unpredictable variables, right? If you have between you and your supplier and your suppliers, and the grower, if you have multi-year backstock of this stuff, then you can sort of smooth out the cost and availability and unpredictability, including, if all of a sudden, you're selling a lot more of it, you have access to it, right? Versus, being stuck behind the 8-ball. And I really think it's like partnerships. So as we always talk about, just being open and communicative with all your partners in the supply chain so that we can all work together toward the same goal of predictability and acceptability.
Okay, that makes sense. And as we've talked about in the past, You've talked about the things that brands need to take into account about ingredient availability. And one of the things you always come back to is communication, having established relationship with suppliers and forecasting longer term and communicating about that forecasting. Does that definitely still hold true? Is there anything you would add to that list?
I think, that you have recapped it at a really, succinctly. I think the only thing is I would add is looking at, does freshness impact product quality?
Okay.
And really understanding like what is your parameters around it, and knowing your herbs and knowing which ones it matters to, which one it's sort of negligible. If you did like, a $500,000 experiment or a couple $100,000 experiment, you might be able to perceive a difference at the edges. But other than that, does it matter? And in fact, sometimes some herbs, the longer you store it, the better it becomes because it sort of mellows out. You get rid of the volatile oils that you may not want in that herb, and it sort of mellows out and changes to something else, sort of like aging fine wine.
Okay, so that brings back a really important topic that I think we don't talk about enough in the industry, and that is when you're dealing with herbs, you need to deal with people who know herbs, who know that kind of information. Because I think we have some people who think a powder is powder is powder, when, that's so not true when it comes to botanicals. So, that's a really important point.
Let me interject and tag onto that idea, right? That there's two types I want to divide this industry when it comes to botanicals and botanical extracts and the whole vein, right? Whether it's color, flavor, or whatnot. There is what I call the whole herbalism portion of the business. So people like that look at the herb as a whole and are looking at herbs and formulations as a complex set of matrices. We know some of the chemical constituents, but not all of them. So we sort of want the whole representation of the herb. And then there's the other side of the industry, which I think is more akin to, we're looking for a specific color, flavor, or chemical compound. For example, 15% gissenosides or 20% gissenosides or 98% catagens for green tea extract. Whereas, does it matter what other chemical constituents are in that 98%? For safety perspective, maybe, but from an efficacy perspective, you're really relying on that one chemical marker to sort of define the efficacy of that product or extract. And then, if you sort of roll it back downstream, the same idea, right? You're looking at that marker compound or a set of marker compounds. Whereas whole herbalism is, you don't want to get beyond a certain number of concentration because you start knocking things out of your matrix. So if we sort of split the two up, then we're even more definitive about what we're looking at and how we should look at it.
Right. That makes total sense. Okay. So when we're talking about supply chain resilience, we these days have to take environmental factors into account. Not only for climate change and the impact of extreme weather and, prevention thereof, but also coping with it. So what kinds of considerations do you think people need to be looking at when they're setting up their supply chain or maintaining their supply chain?
I think one of the things that what I look at is, can you have more than one region where the herb is sourced from? For example, if you are using a herb like ginger and you're just looking at a phytoactive constituent, you may be able to source from multiple regions like India, China, Nepal, wherever ginger grows, right? As long as the chemical constituent is high enough. But if you're looking for a certain flavor profile, and, one of our favorite places, Suzanne, that we talk about is Hawaii and, vacationing and sun and all the fun stuff. But Hawaiian ginger has a very different taste profile than a lot of other gingers out there. If you're looking for that taste profile, you may not be able to have multiple origin ginger because that taste profile probably only exists in Hawaii, and maybe you can get close with some ginger from Fiji, but Chinese ginger, Indian ginger doesn't taste like that.
Yeah, completely
So
different.
it's African ginger, just a whole different taste profile. So when we talk about these supply chains, they're very complex, but you have to know your herb. I think that's where when my family started in this business over 40 something years ago, most people started in the herbal part were herbalists or herbal specialists. And as we sort of scale these companies and, bring in professional management and whatnot, they bring in great tools and, ways to look at things, but they may not be herbal specialists. So they don't understand what matrices we need to overlay with that professional management and KPIs and all these other things. Because, it's not just looking at a problem or an issue from one angle, it's looking at it from multiple angles, and how do we marry them in a way that is efficacious.
Right. Okay, that makes sense. So it comes back down to knowing what you're looking for, knowing your herbs, knowing what you need, rather than just, oops, need ginger, check that off. So yeah, again, smart buying, knowledgeable buying.
Yeah, and it's having those expertise in that herb or herbs that you're buying and knowing what's important, right? Doesn't matter where it comes from or it doesn't. How specific and tight your spec needs to be for your purpose versus not, right? And I'm not talking about the safety or quality side of things. I'm just talking about right now, really like the organoleptic and chemistry side of things.
Right.
Like really like, how much leeway do you have in there, right? If you're making an extract and you're standardizing it to a chemical constituent, your leeway might be pretty big. But if you're using it for, your favorite ice cream and the flavor is very unique, you might be your bandwidth all of a sudden pulls a lot closer to your spec, becomes a lot tighter for it to be able to achieve that at a repeatable level, right? And I think the thing is consistency, repeatability, and availability are the three things that really people have to really focus on.
Okay, so let's make that more complicated by adding to it the fact that when consumption and demand for products grows, it's sometimes quite rapid. And especially with botanicals, you can't just snap your fingers and create more ashwagandha or or whatever it is. Yeah. So, how can companies it's difficult to prepare because you just don't know when something's going to take off with consumers all of a sudden. But are there things that companies can do to kind of prepare themselves for this kind of, unanticipated demand?
Yeah, I think one of the things that you can really do, right, is, again, know your herbs. And I hate to keep saying this, but it's really knowing your product, right, and understanding how you can navigate the minefield. And if you're not a product expert and you don't have someone that, like a Joseph Brinkman in-house, that who knows everything, I wouldn't say everything, but is quite knowledgeable in a lot of different herbs, right? No one knows everything, as I like to tell my son. But if you have that kind of expert, then you might be able to get away with partnering with someone with less expertise. But, you want to match that level of expertise in-house with the ones out of, that isn't in-house. So I like to say that we're really an extension, and New Herbs are really an extension of people's operations, and we're here to look after your best interests as well, and really trying to understand and bring and highlight some of these issues that might come to fore, and really work with companies to really get to where they need to be. And I think for us, we're not relying on any one customer, so we have quite a complex matrix of customers, and our supply chain allows us to sort of supply them in these areas of need when all of a sudden there's a spike, and we can be able to absorb it to a better degree than other companies who are just really trying to do a single thing or something that is not as complex. And having relationships, right? Again, we have relationships back to the field where we can have, ability to, there's our partners that we work with on a yearly basis, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's also relationships that we build that we can sort of backfill some of that if that all comes short. If the supply comes in short, we're able to find other venues and avenues that are still qualified. We just happen to, not do business with them on an annual basis, but because we've been in business so long, we end up doing business with them over the course of time quite repeatedly.
Right. No, that makes sense. Okay, so you have your main suppliers that you use, but then you also have other people that you can rely on if you need a backup, that you've pre-vetted, so to speak. So is that how companies should practice their sourcing? Should they, like have a relationship, like key supplier they have a relationship with, but then other people who are backed up? I mean, this obviously doesn't apply to people who just buy from price,
Yeah. And I think, yes, that is, having more than one vendor is always a good idea. So I don't think that's, that is bad in practice at all. I think that's the best practice, right? And I think the other thing is, as we talk about, if you buy on pricing, it's going to be harder and harder for you to mitigate this variability because you're stuck at spot buy. So if you need 1,000 pounds today, you're going to pay today's prices. If you can find that 1,000 pounds.
Yeah.
And no one's looking at it as a relationship and trying to do you a favor because we all were working toward the same goal, right? I think that's the key, right? The goal is we all want quality herbs and, safe herbs. But, if you're going to nickel and dime me this year, that's our relationship. It's a nickel and dime relationship. It's not a valuable partner relationship. And I think that's part of it. It's like, yes, are there years where the harvest is bad and I can reduce my margin and do whatever I need to do to help make it through that year? Because I know you'll be there next year and the following year. And I can look at that relationship differently versus like, oh, you're just here whenever I'm the cheapest.
Yeah.
It's a whole different relationship.
Yeah,
So
you're not going to go to the mat for those people like you did for so many people during lockdown.
Yeah, I think that's part of it. It's really having those relationships and understanding how to, that the relationship is not transactional, it's long term, right? And we've all been in transactional relationships where you scratch my back, I scratch your back. And if you don't scratch my back, I'm not scratching yours, right?
Right.
But, in this long-term relationship view, you're really trying to make sure that we're all growing together and moving toward the same direction.
Yeah, mutually beneficial relationships are a lot healthier and more sustainable.
Yeah.
So that makes total sense to me.
Especially when there's variability, right? When things are very steady, it might help in the short run. But when there's huge variability, then it may not help you in the long run.
Well, and as you've always said, variability is something that you can't plan for, but you kind of have to try. So,
yeah.
You have to try. Okay. Just one last question. Digital technology. It's, it just is bigger and bigger and bigger parts of our lives. How is it used in supply chain management for ingredients? And how do you expect it to evolve? I mean, I know at one point we were all talking about blockchain, and I haven't heard anybody mention that for ages.
We used to call companies technology companies and then everyone else non-technology companies of some sort. But I think in 2023, we're all technology companies. But there are some people that are pure technology, meaning that's all they do is produce technology, like a NVIDIA, right? Like they're a pure technology play. But whereas even someone like, although we may not like them in this industry very much sometimes, is a company like John Deere who makes machinery, right? But the reality is their machinery is driven off these satellites now, and they have all this big blocks of information. So, they're a very good candidate for artificial intelligence and helping, increase your reliability of yield and whatnot, how to maximize yield through aggregating these huge data sets and how much to use or not to use of certain things. I think, we're all slowly becoming technology, more and more tech focused, right? If you don't have a strong technology team anymore, it's not a very viable way to do business in 2023, no matter what industry you're in. And I think there's a lot of tools coming down the pipeline that will make our supply chains stronger and more resilient. I think one of the things that I personally am very passionate about is this freshness idea, which then if we extrapolate freshness, it becomes shelf life, right? How do we have tools that are fast, relatively affordable to sort of stop food waste and other botanical waste and other waste in the supply chain? Now it's like before we sort of have like this set of rules where it says, if this, then that, right? And we weren't necessarily, examining it on the fly, right? But as technology gets cheaper and better, my friend has a digital nose startup, and he's working on a way to sort of detect spoilage at the consumer level. So, for example, think about it on milk, right? It has an expiration date of X. Well, now maybe in the future, you'll have like a dot on it or something else. So if it spoils, it'll change colors and indicate it spoils. So whether it spoils in 5 days or 50 days, you'll know by having seen that data right there.
Without having to smell spoiled milk.
Well, you as humans, right? We have, our noses are very fine tools, but I think we no longer trust our noses. A lot of people, right? They just look at the date and they throw it away, right? Versus smelling it, tasting it, and say, this is still good and I can still use it. But a lot of us look at the date and say, out in the compost, hopefully.
Right? We don't engage our organoleptic abilities.
Mm-hmm.
So I just want to, as we sign off, I want to touch back on something you said about the John Deere equipment that's connected to satellites. And I want to be the first to welcome our new tractor overlords.
Yes, it is. It's amazing. If you have never been inside, whether it's Deere or any other brand, one of those tractor trailers that these big farms drive, right? It is literally a digital control center in there. It is, so sophisticated. It would shock you.
It's wild. I had no idea.
I would encourage you to take an hour or two drive outside of Chicago and head up north into that grain belt.
Okay, I'll do that. Once again, you always introduce me to ideas I haven't heard of before, so I always love our conversations. Thank you so much, Wilson. This has been really interesting. Thank you again. Look forward to speaking with you next time.
Thanks for listening. To learn more about the business of herbs and botanicals, visit newherbs.com. To keep listening to great episodes, be sure to subscribe to this podcast in iTunes, Google Play, Amazon, or Spotify, and make sure to give us a rating too.